Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to talk about how your brain communicates, literally neuron to neuron. Look, if you want to understand anything about how we think, how we move, or even diseases like Alzheimer's, you have to start right here with how brain cells talk to each other. And the sheer scale of it all is, well, you'll see. Just try to wrap your head around this number, 240 trillion. That's the estimated number of connections, or synapses, in your brain. You've got about 100 billion neurons, and each one of those can have thousands of connections. It's this mind-boggling complexity that makes the brain so incredibly powerful and, so hard to study. So what exactly is a synapse? It's the command center, the junction where all the magic happens. But here's the crazy part. It's not a physical wire. The neurons don't actually touch. There's a tiny, tiny gap between them called the synaptic cleft. Think of it like a canyon that a message has to cross. Okay, so that leads to a pretty big question, right? If they're not touching, how does the signal get from one neuron to the next? How does an electrical impulse just leap across that empty space? Well, the answer isn't electricity. It's chemistry. It's a brilliant little chemical handoff. Think of it like a tiny four-step relay race that happens in a flash. First, an electrical zap, the action potential, hits the end of the line. Boom. That opens these little gates for calcium to flood in. The calcium is the trigger, telling these little bubbles packed with chemicals, neurotransmitters, to dump their contents into that gap. And then those chemicals just float across and lock on to the next neuron, delivering the message. Done. But here's something that's just as important as sending the signal: stopping it. You can't have those chemical messengers just hanging around, or you'd have total chaos. So the brain has a cleanup crew with three main strategies. 1. Reuptake. The first neuron literally sucks the chemicals back up to be recycled. 2. It sends in enzymes to just chop them up. And 3. They sometimes just drift away. This cleanup is absolutely critical for clear communication. Now here's where it gets really interesting. A neuron isn't just listening to one other neuron. It's getting thousands of messages at the exact same time, and they're not all saying the same thing. Some are shouting, "Go, fire now," while others are whispering, "Shh, stop, don't do anything." It's a constant balancing act. And here's how that works, basically. You have two types of signals. On the left, you've got your go signals, the excitatory ones. They let positive ions in, pushing the neuron closer to firing off its own signal. But on the right, you have the stop signals, the inhibitory ones. They let negative ions in, which makes it harder for the neuron to fire. The neuron is constantly doing this math, adding up all the goes and subtracting all the stops to decide if it's going to pass the message on. All right, so now that we have the basic rules of the game, let's meet some of the key players. And we'll start with a really important one of the first to ever be discovered: acetylcholine. Man, acetylcholine is a real jack of all trades. Up in the front of your brain, it's a huge deal for learning, memory, making decisions, all that high-level stuff. Deeper inside, it's helping you stay balanced and control your movements. And way down in your brainstem, it's one of the main chemicals that's telling you when to be awake and when to be asleep. It's everywhere. And this is where it all becomes incredibly real. In Alzheimer's disease, the very systems that use acetylcholine for learning and memory start to wither and die. As the source material says, very bluntly, it just ain't working anymore. This breakdown in communication is a direct cause of the heartbreaking symptoms of the disease. But because we understand this biology, we can actually do something about it. Remember that cleanup crew, the enzymes that chop up neurotransmitters? Well, drugs like Aricept are designed to block that specific enzyme for acetylcholine. This means that whatever acetylcholine the brain can still make gets to hang out in the synapse a little longer, boosting the signal. It's a perfect example of how this basic science leads to real treatments. Next up, let's talk about a whole family of messengers called the amines. This group has some celebrities you've probably heard of: dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. And what's wild is that even though they handle different jobs, like mood, focus, pleasure, they all kind of use the same playbook. So what is their playbook? Well, one of the biggest differences is how they deliver the message. Acetylcholine is often like a simple key in a lock. It opens a gate directly. The amines, they're way more indirect. They use a more complicated receptor, one that's less like a key and more like ringing a doorbell that sets off a whole chain reaction of events inside the cell. It's a slower, more complex effect. And you can see their shared strategy laid out right here. They all use those more complicated, indirect receptors. But look at how the signal ends. For all three, the main off switch is reuptake. That first neuron just vacuums them back up. And this is a huge target for medication. Antidepressants, SSRIs, that stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. They work by blocking that vacuum, leaving more serotonin in the synapse to do its job. It's all connected. So at the end of the day, it's this incredibly simple system of go and stop, of pluses and minuses, repeated across 240 trillion connections. And it's fine-tuned by this whole cast of different chemical messages. This is the foundation for every single thing you think, feel, and do. Which leaves us with the biggest question of all, right? How on earth does this absolute chaos of simple signals somehow combine to create the symphony of a single coherent thought?